Calling a murder non-consensual almost seems redundant when you think about it. I mean, it is kind of assumed that if a person is killing someone, the individual being killed didn't ask for it. However, as hard as it may be to believe, there are exceptions. The first example that pops into your head upon hearing that is likely euthanasia or assisted suicide. The most famous of these stories likely being that of Dr. Jack Kevorkian, an American physician who was an advocate for voluntary euthanasia and was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder for assisting with the suicide of a man who was suffering from ALS. Today, though, we're talking about a case where the victim actually wants to be murdered, in the type of way we typically talk about on this channel, only with a willing and enthusiastic participant. Sharon LaPaca was an internet entrepreneur living in Hampstead, Maryland during the 1990s. She lived with her husband Victor and was described by friends and family as, quote, the walking definition of normal. Sharon made money via e-commerce, selling products such as psychic readings and self-proclaimed love potions. This was the dawn of the internet, so rather than being flooded with overly polished sites, AI-driven algorithms, and bots trying to rope you into cryptocurrency scams, there were these strange niche web order services and chat rooms where you could speak to all kinds of strangers about anything and everything. Unbeknownst to her husband, her family, or her friends, Sharon's online persona was anything but the walking definition of normal. She would frequent these online chat rooms, particularly adult ones, where she would discuss very strange and disturbing sexual fantasies with complete strangers, such as her desire to be tortured, strangled, and even killed, and was trying to find someone who would fulfill her wish. LaPaca spoke with dozens of men online over the course of several years, and at one point even went to meet a man from New Jersey for a dinner date. The man politely ended their date when he realized LaPaca was genuinely asking to be tortured to death, and this was a common theme during most of her online chats. The men would be interested up to the point they realized she was serious, and then they would disappear. In the summer of 1996, though, she would finally meet someone who shared her extreme desires. Robert Glass was a 45-year-old computer analyst who met Sharon in an adult chat room in August of 1996. He was previously married for 14 years to a woman named Sherry. However, the marriage ended when she discovered emails he was exchanging with women he was meeting on the internet. Not only were these emails sexual in nature, but they revealed some very dark and violent fetishes Robert had, which prompted Sherry to ask for a divorce. By the time he first began chatting with Sharon, Robert had been lurking adult chat rooms for several years, looking to scratch this disturbing itch in any way possible, but never quite coming up with a way to satiate himself. That is, until he met Sharon LaPaca. The two's personalities were essentially made for one another, with Sharon wanting extreme violence to be inflicted upon her, while Robert wanted to inflict the extreme violence. Over the course of just a few weeks, the two exchanged close to 900 emails explicitly detailing their desire to meet and finally indulge in this shared fantasy. And Robert was very much not discouraged by the fact Sharon was serious. In October of 1996, LaPaca told her husband she was headed to Georgia to meet up with an old friend. However, after Sharon left, Victor found a letter that she had left behind stating that she was starting a new life and asking him not to look for her. Victor immediately contacted the police, who were able to access Sharon's computer and discovered the emails she'd exchanged with Glass. Robert lived in North Carolina, so police there were contacted and placed Robert's trailer under surveillance, hoping to spot LaPaca. But after several days of her not showing, a judge issued a search warrant for the premises, where several of Sharon's personal belongings were found inside, with the most disturbing discovery being just a few feet out back of the home: a shallow grave containing the body of Sharon LaPaca. Sharon had been dead for at least a week when she was found, and her body showed signs of having been tortured. But Glass's explanation to police was much different than what the contents of his emails suggested. He claimed that he simply wanted to fulfill her wish of being abused, but never actually wanted to go through with killing her. He insisted that her death had been a horrible accident and that he'd accidentally strangled her during one of their masochistic flings. Glass would end up pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. In what would be the final bizarre twist in a truly bizarre case, Glass would die from a heart attack just 2 years into his sentence. This case gained a fair bit of notoriety, but not as much as you'd probably think given the absolutely insane nature of the story. I would like to say that's because this sort of thing never happened again, but the truth is another case would come along just a few short years later, one that somehow was even more disturbing than the story of Sharon Lepaka. Armin Meiwes was the poster child for the word unassuming. As far as his neighbors in Westfield, Germany were concerned, the middle-aged computer repairman was a harmless loner who kept to himself. However, one day in December 2002, local police were contacted by a college student who had found some disturbing postings made by Meiwes online. These postings specifically stated that he was looking for a, quote, well-built 18 to 25-year-old to be slaughtered and consumed. Finding these posts obviously concerning, police paid his home a visit the following day, hoping to get to the bottom of these strange internet ramblings. Soon after arriving at the 41-year-old's home, though, they quickly realized something was terribly wrong. Inside of Meiwes' home, they discovered the remains of 43-year-old Bernd Brandis, who had been brutally murdered, carved into pieces, and partially eaten by Armin. It was a horrific crime, the circumstances of which seemed pretty clear-cut initially. However, Meiwes quickly revealed to police a stunning fact. Brandis had actually volunteered to be murdered and eaten. In fact, he was a completely willing participant, with the two even making a recording of Brandis before the killing in which he explicitly states that he is volunteering to be murdered. Armin told police that ever since he was a teenager, he had a deep sexual fantasy involving killing and eating another person, something he said came about as a result of his interest in the children's story Hansel and Gretel. For years, Armin understandably tried to keep this fantasy contained, but after the death of his mother, he no longer felt the desire to hide it and began posting online looking for a volunteer, which is how he met Bernd Brandis. Brandis wasn't Armin's ideal victim. He was even older than Meiwes himself, rather than a strapping young adult, which is what Armin wanted. However, this kind of thing is pretty much a textbook example of beggars can't be choosers, so when Bernd responded to Meiwes' post and Armin finally realized he was going to have a chance to fulfill his fantasy, he jumped at it. The two met up at Meiwes' family home in Rottenburg. Before they began anything, the pair recorded Bernd's message to law enforcement, explaining that everything he was about to do was entirely of his own choice and asking that Meiwes not be charged with any crime should police discover what happened. It is then that the video goes from strange disclaimer to an outright snuff film. Normally, I would give a brief description of what was on this video, trying to keep it somewhat PG as to stay within YouTube guidelines. However, I honestly don't know if I can do that here, so let me just skip forward and say that after several hours of recording some of the most disturbing acts I've ever read about, Meiwes kills Brandis by stabbing him in the neck. He then placed his body in a tub where he proceeded to drain all of the blood before dismembering him and storing him in a freezer. For the next year, Armin would periodically consume Brandis's flesh, eating about 40 pounds of it by the time of his arrest. While Bernd had tried desperately to prevent any sort of legal consequences to Armin, the legal system isn't in the habit of allowing you to murder and eat someone just because they gave you permission. Meiwes was put on trial in late 2003 and in a stunning decision was only found guilty of manslaughter, primarily due to the fact that the video of his victim explicitly giving their killer consent was quite jarring. Prosecutors appealed and a second trial was ordered, which didn't go as well for Armin as he was sentenced to life in prison. As both of these stories demonstrate, even the human instinct for survival can be suppressed by our own brain if it is something we want bad enough, showing that for some, the most unnatural of desires can drive them to horrific ends. Thanks as always for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.